Brian.
Hi there.
Good afternoon. We're just going to give people a minute to come in the Zoom and get the recording up. It's wonderful. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Fantastic. Great. All right. I'm going to get things started. I'm going to read Rabbi Moss's bio in case you missed it last week, and just reflect on how lucky we are to have him as part of Bethel. Rabbi Dr. Stephen Moss has served B'nai Israel in Oakdale, Long Island as its rabbi since 1972 and is now Rabbi Emeritus. He's past chair of the Center for Social Justice and Human Understanding. He served as chair of the county's Human Rights Commission from 1992 to 2019 and founder and co-chair of Suffolk County Anti-Bias Task Force, founder and director of Stop Bias, the only educational programs for hate crime offenders in the country. He served proudly as the Suffolk County Police Department chaplain since 1986 and holds the rank of Chief Chaplain Emeritus and chaplain to the county's Sheriff's Department and rank of captain. And he is now chaplain to the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Department and chaplain to the Police Benevolent Society and several others. He enjoys cycling and traveling. He's doing a major bike ride in Israel in October. Temple Bethel is happy to contribute to those efforts that he is taking part of that. He's a student of Kabbalah and Mysticism, and he has received numerous awards, including Chaplain of the Year and Rabbi of the Year. And as I said in our first meeting at the beginning of the month of this class, that there are many wonderful things about being a rabbi in South Florida, but one of the most wonderful things is retired rabbis come and are part of your synagogue and your community. And that has been my experience since day one at Bethel. And some just come to worship or visit when they're here for the summer, and others full on become part of your teaching staff and your community, and you learn from. And that is the case with Temple Bethel and Rabbi Moss. He was huge help with all his chaplaincy work when my brother was ill, and just was there as a presence. He has beautiful spiritual ideas and is also able to talk about the concrete. I'm going to drop the books that he has for sale currently on Amazon in the chat, so you'll be able to access them. And we just feel really blessed to have Rabbi Moss as part of our teaching. And this will not be the last time you hear from him. This is the last class of the series. Next month, we start with the most amazing poetry out of Israel, Rachel Korazim, and a month on poetry of Natan Alterman, who combines journalism and poetry. And it's just a fantastic month ahead as well. So again, Rabbi Moss, thank you so much for being so present with us at Temple Bethel. I'll hand things over to you.
Okay, thank you, Rabbi. And really, it's a pleasure to be a part of Temple Bethel. After being a rabbi in the congregation on Long Island for 47 years, when you retire and you move out of the areas, as my wife and I have done, my wife Judy, is that you feel kind of displaced, a rootedness. And so to find a place like Temple Bethel that is so welcoming, and as I've become to learn, not only to me, but obviously to so many others, it really serves a wonderful spiritual purpose as well. So thank you, my honor. So hi, everyone, shalom. If you want to just raise your hands, how many of you were here with me last week? Okay, Judith, not okay, because I wasn't not able to take everyone in last week, and I know that there are other people streaming and YouTubing and all those kinds of things. As I indicated last time, just to kind of repeat it, but to kind of establish a baseline for today's presentation. And I really wish we could be in a classroom together or in a sanctuary together and actually create a God-filled experience with meditation, with maybe some chanting, but that's going to be left for another time. Rabbi Jessica, that's an idea, okay? I know Rabbi Amy does a very good job with this as well, and my certainly rooting in Kabbalah is where I come from, but also, as I indicated last time, really my life's experiences with God. But as I indicate in my book, God is with me, I have no fear, and those words sound familiar to you. Maybe they do in Hebrew, Adonai li v'lo ira, the last words of that beautiful song prayer, Adon Olam. Is that I've been blessed with a sense of God in my life, but as I indicate and do in the book, after each chapter, and I share a story from my life and experience with God in my life, I really engage the reader. I say to you, the reader, and so I say to all of you today, is that who, what, where, when, why, the 5 W's I talked about, and I'm going to talk a little bit about today again, refer to, with God in your life. I'm no holy, I'm no special. As Rabbi Jessica will let you know, one of the beautiful things about Judaism is that Judaism is a democratic religion. We are all equal before God. There might be some people who, due to their spiritual life, might be closer to God in the sense of access because of the knowledge that they might have. But in truth, that knowledge is accessible to all of us, especially in the marvelous world of today that we have. I just finished a Kabbalah class on reincarnation, which is a whole nother subject with my wonderful teacher in Yerushalayim. That was from 10 to 11 today. And as he said to me, we are in an incredible time now because all of these teachings are available through the web, through internet. They're available, things that were never available to anyone, and things are being translated as well. But let me focus on today and why you're here with me, and I'm very fortunate for this. I ask God's blessings upon our being here today, and may truly it be that as we open our eyes to see each other, we will be afforded the opportunity and the blessing to be able to open our spiritual, our inner eyes, and be able to see God who is here, everywhere, and always. I know Rabbi Dan has shared this. I've heard this a couple of sermons over the time that I've been able to be benefiting from listening to him, and Rabbi Jessica possibly as well. But I remember Rabbi Dan had offered this wonderful midrash pertaining to the rabbi's discussion about what God actually said on Mount Sinai. And the one rabbi said, well, of course, the 10 Commandments, obviously that's what's written. Another rabbi said, no, God only said the first 5, not the second 5. And why? Because the second 5, do not murder and do not steal, are the ethical commandments, the moral commandments. And we as human beings can understand those. We don't need necessarily God to tell us those because we understand what it is to be living in a community. But really it's the first 5 that God said, which are the more, in quotes, spiritual ones. And then another rabbi said, well, no, it's only the first commandment. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, I'm the Lord your God who brought you forth from the land of Egypt. So another rabbi said, well, that's not even a commandment at all. So what's that all about? And so another rabbi said, well, God did not say that first long sentence, which is the key to all of this, but rather God only said the first word, Anochi, which means I am. And then finally, another rabbi said, no, you're all wrong. God said nothing else but the first letter of the first word, which, as you probably know, is an aleph. And of course, to say that God said an aleph, what does that mean? Because an aleph is what? There's no pronunciation. An aleph is what? An aleph is silent. And therefore, in truth, God said nothing at all at Mount Sinai. God simply was there. But the key was that the people then knew God was there. In my book, but it's certainly, I don't want to keep referring to the book, that's kind of silly, is that there is an analogy that I like to use about God and where I think God is, meaning God is always. When you walk into either your bathroom or you walk into the kitchen and you go up to the sink, wherever a sink is, and you look at the sink, and obviously there's no water yet coming out of that faucet. You know that there is water in those pipes, but until you turn on the faucet, the water does not come out. You walk into a darkened room and there are lamps, there are lights. However, the lights will not come on. The darkness will not be dispelled until you do what? Until you flicker the switch and complete the circuit. This is certainly my belief and experience that God is always here. It is a teaching in traditional Judaism. It is certainly a teaching in Kabbalah and Jewish Mysticism, as is generally called. And the question becomes, are we all able to access that? Are we all able to turn the faucet on? Are we all able to turn that switch on? My answer to all of you is yes. But how and what and where and why, I'd like to explore with you today, using, for which I'm grateful for, the experiences in my life. Remember, for those of you with me last week, those 5 W's. First one is, who is God? Who is God? To me, certainly, God is just everything. Certainly, God is what we need God to be when we call upon God. Those beautiful words from our tradition, Aneni biyom karenu, answer me, God, when I call upon you. Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, the very famous Hasidic rabbi, teaches that we can call upon God anytime and just speak to God, because God is always listening. God is always here. The answers are another question, but certainly God is always here. And so, therefore, there are also numerous, hundreds of names of God in the Torah, not just one name Adonai, but hundreds of different names. And each name reflects the need that we have of God at that time and the experience that we have with God at that time as well. As I mentioned last time, many of the stories that I share with you today come from my incredible 30 years as a rabbi, chaplain at Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in Manhattan. Some of you might have actually been there as a patient or have had relatives there, friends there. Going back to 1970, certainly it is a very, very different institution today than it was then. The fight against cancer in the 70s was almost barbaric. And the 2 floors that I did specialize in over those 30 years were, number 1, head and neck cancers, which was quite incredible in those days, because basically all they knew was to do surgery and cut apart parts of people's faces and then do some kind of a treatment. And the other was pediatrics. I was walking along the floor one day in pediatric floor 5 at that time in Sloan Kettering, and one of the patient's grandmothers came up to me. And I had been visiting, I knew about this a grandson. He was 14 years old. He had over 40 tumors in his lungs and was dying. At this point in time, he was in a coma. And the grandmother came up to me and said, Rabbi, could you go to visit my grandson and recite Tehillim, offer the Psalms for him? And I said to her, I certainly will. My feeling is that, and one of the beautiful things about our tradition is, it will always offer, even up until the very last breath that a person takes and beyond, it always will offer us something to do. We never have to, and for those of you who have gone through this kind of experience in your lives, that feeling of helplessness, a loved one is dying, a loved one is sick, a loved one is in pain, and they say to me, and you might have said it to yourselves, I said it to myself with my own family members, I'm so helpless, what can I really do? Well, first of all, you can always be there. And love is the greatest thing of all. But our tradition offers many rituals and prayers and things we could do. And so I said, of course. So I went into this boy's room, and the first thing I always try to do is the physical touching is very important, because by holding a hand, you are overcoming that physical barrier between you and, in this case, the patient. On an average day at Sloan Kettering, I would visit between 20 and 30 patients in this incredible place. So I sat down by his bed, I held his hand, and as I indicated, I said he was in a coma, but I told him who I am, gave him my name, why I'm visiting today, and as Grandma asked me to say these words of the Psalms. As some of you might know, the offering of Psalms is our prayers unto themselves. And by the way, if you want something to take away from you today, so to speak, if you ever say, well, what Psalm should I be reading when I'm in need of God's assistance? I need God's help. I need presence. I'm so lost. I'm so frightened. Or for a loved one who's very ill, Psalm 91. It is considered to be the most powerful of all the Psalms. It is called the Sefer Pekaim, which means the Sefer, the Psalm against the demonic, the evil forces, the powerful forces in our lives that are attempting to harm us. Anyway, I sat by the boy and I began to recite Psalm 91 and other Psalms as well. But then something very interesting happened, and that is there it is, thank you. God bless technology. Yosei Beseta Elyon Betzel Tzadai Itlonan. O you who dwell in the shelter of the Most High and abide in the protection of Shaddai, God the protector. Shaddai, that's why Shin Dalid Yud, Shaddai, is the name of God that is on a mezuzah, because it is believed to be God, the one who watches over us and protects us. In addition to the fact that Shin Dalid Yud is actually an acronym for Shomer Delatot Yisrael, God who watches over the doorposts of Israel. Anyway, I sat by this boy's bed, holding his hand, and then something happened. And my mind took over my neshama, my soul, my heart, and my mind began racing. And I began to say to myself, what am I doing? What am I doing? Look at this, what's happening here? The grandmother is in agony, the family and the boy here. And I said, what am I really praying for? Do I pray that this boy awaken from his coma and I can be able to talk to him or whatever? And I said to myself, no, that's not a prayer. Why? Because the coma is the body's way of protecting itself from pain and discomfort. It's better he's in the coma. Then my mind said, I said to myself, do I pray that he awakened from the coma and he awakened and all of a sudden, in a miraculous way, truly miraculous to say the least, he has no more tumors in his lungs? Is this what I pray for? There are such a thing called spontaneous remissions, where literally a person has cancer one day and the doctors are actually see this on the MRIs and the scans and all, and the next day it is all gone, spontaneous remissions. But I said to myself, is that something that I could really pray for? I then said, maybe I should pray by these words of the Psalms, because remember, the words of the Psalms, the words of prayers are vehicle of our soul to rise above, to rise outward to God, to then return back to us some form of whatever that answer is or whatever that presence is. And so I said, do I pray that he die? Within Jewish tradition, you can pray that a person dies. It is acceptable. It is actually a form of passive euthanasia if you believe in the power of prayer, and is acceptable even under Orthodox traditional Judaism. Halakha states it so, and it's based upon an incident in the Bible with King Hezekiah, which I'm not going to go into right now because that'll take me off the side onto another side road here, onto another track. And I said to myself, that's what I would really wish for this boy, because that would end his misery and the family's, and he would find peace. But then guess what? I ran out of questions. My mind quieted down. And then, interestingly enough, and for me, beautifully and spiritually enough, for the first time at in that room, I felt my hand in his and his in mine. Up until then, it was all inside of here, my mind, and I missed what? The connection between the two of us. It was all about me and my questions and not about him, and thereby us, and then finally about God. And then I found peace within myself, and I said, dear God, may it be that no matter what happens to this boy, may it be for his good, and may he receive your blessings. And then I began to truly be able to recite the Psalms, and I felt for every single letter and vowel in the Hebrew, I felt our hands together, but more importantly, I felt the presence of God. So to me at that moment, who was God? God was that presence when I was able to quiet down the mind and began to say, God is there, even in the midst of such a most difficult and horrible experience, certainly for us as human beings and this family, and yes, this boy. So to me, God is even there during those moments that make no sense at all. Who is God? Where is God? I'll never forget the phone call about 11 o'clock at night from my mother, who was at my sister's home up in Westchester. My sister walked in to her baby Paul's room. Paul was 17 months old, and found that he had died in his sleep. And my sister was absolutely, as anyone can imagine, hysterical. My mother was hysterical, and she said, "You have to come up here immediately. Paul is dead." I went up there, and it was just so overwhelming, the agony that my poor sister and obviously her husband were going through at that time. And there was no way to comfort them except hugging, and even that was difficult because she was just inconsolable, as anyone could imagine. An autopsy was done. It was believed to be SIDS, Southern Infant Death Syndrome. In my own mind, and we did have a funeral, of course, but it's interesting how at the end of the year, my sister really didn't want to have a traditional unveiling at the cemetery, but we got together as family and some of her closest friends at the unveiling time. So we waited the whole year. She waited the year. And during that year, she never left the house. She had 2 other children. It was just a very difficult time. But then something interesting happened, and that the day when we got together to say a few prayers and just comfort each other that a year had passed, all of a sudden that next day, she said, "Well, it's time for me to get back to living." And she returned, she got a new job. Ultimately, they did have another child, Eli, who's about 24 years old right now and is probably getting married very soon. But for me, if you were to say to me, do I believe God was involved in all of this? My answer always has been yes. How? I can't say. No one could say. No one should be able to say. But on the other hand, when I saw the love that was expressed by our family and the support to Margie, my sister, when I saw what happened in that community that lived up in Chappaqua, and actually the community got together, and in Paul's memory, they donated the monies. And actually, if any of you have been up to Chappaqua, there's a playground by the railroad station for the Amtrak at Chappaqua, and that playground is in memory of Paul, and there's a plaque on there. Their support of my sister during that time was extraordinary. But then also who God is and what God is, when we say that God is here, even during the most horrible moments in life, it takes us beyond what I call the finite or that moment or experience and brings us into the infinite that opens us up to other possibilities of experience. I'll explain to you what I mean in the following way. While Margie was sitting Shiva, I got another call about 2 nights later. My wife and I were up there during the daytime, and then we went back to Long Island that night. And again, somewhere maybe 10, 11 o'clock at night, I got a call from my mother once again. She and my father stayed over in my sister's house to be there for her. Is that they said, "Stephen, you won't believe this. There's a fire in the house." We were sitting Shiva, and all of a sudden a fire came through the walls. We're now standing outside. The house is being destroyed. Their home in Chappaqua, for those of you who have been up into Westchester, the home actually was from the 1700s, part of it. And anyway, my sister and her kids had to move out of that for a whole year for the house to be rebuilt, which it ultimately was. But there was only one room in that entire house that was totally, totally destroyed. It was baby Paul's room. It was almost as if, of course not, because obviously you could see, we all remember Paul. It's about 25 years ago, I guess 26 years ago. But the fact is that it was as if his neshama, his whole being, was in another place. Interestingly enough also, and I said this once to my sister, and these views of life after death are in our tradition, there is no question, and I do believe in reincarnation, is that baby Paul was named after our grandmother Paula, who died at the age of 92. So Paula was 92 years of age, baby Paul was 17 months of age. And as I was studying the different classical texts on reincarnation, I began to say to myself, you know something, Maybe Grandma Paula's neshama, her soul, had to come back to do something for a short period of time, and then her mission was over, and therefore she went back into Gilgul, as it is called in reincarnation, to continue on her soul's eternal journey. Now you might say to me, well, Steve, or Rabbi Steve, or whatever you'd like to call me, do you believe that? My answer always is, in the spiritual dimension, anything is possible. But what that helps me to say is that, guess what? Even in this tragic moment in our lives, something special, important happened. But the fact is that I, or human beings, can even have this idea indicates to me that there is a truth or possibility of a truth to it. There's a very deep connection between Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and Sufism. And there was a book by a Sufi mystic called Alone with the Alone. I can't remember his name right now. And he made the following statement. The fact that human beings can have the idea of God means that there is a God. Why? Because why should a finite creature, a human being, a finite animal, because on one level we are only animals, all right, can have a concept, a feeling, an experience, a belief in the infinite? It must be that the infinite implanted that within the finite. The two are together. As I said last time, is that the question becomes, which all of us, which all of you, myself as well, have to answer is, are we physical beings who live a spiritual life, or are we spiritual beings living a physical existence? Where are you coming from? Okay. When is God? As Rabbi Jessica said, I do a lot of bike riding, and people say to me, be careful, it's very dangerous out there, especially here in Florida. Well, the only time that I was actually in a car accident with my bicycle was on Long Island. So, well, that's one of Florida, I guess. I put it between 400 and 500 miles a month rather, on my bike down here. Anyway, actually, I was going to synagogue that day. I would from May till through September, definitely. My wife and I live 7 miles from our synagogue in Oakdale, Long Island, B'nai Israel. And if it was really nice weather, I would ride my bike to temple. And I had a bat mitzvah that morning, so I'm on the bike. It's a gorgeous day, sort of like here in Florida today. Beautiful June morning. This is now 3 years ago. And I was on one of the side streets to end up at the temple. And I was singing some Shabbat songs and happy as a lark on Shabbat. And all of a sudden, the next thing I know is I'm lying on the ground looking up into the eyes of an EMT. This woman is coming on the opposite tee to me at this street coming. I'm going this way. She came this way. She actually told the cops that she was going along the street. The light turned yellow. She accelerated through the yellow and she hit me on the red light. Okay. You really shouldn't tell that to a police officer, because now that brings her whole thing up to another level. But it also means that she must have hit me somewhere between 30 and 40 miles an hour, since the street limit is 30, and she accelerated. Okay. I was very, 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 very lucky, very fortunate, very blessed, whatever you like to say, because she only hit me on the very front of my front tire, which sent me away from her car. About 2 weeks later, there was a person in Long Island who was actually hit in the middle of the bike on the brakes, on the pedals, and he was sent the opposite direction through the car window. Okay. So thank God. Anyway, I'll add a little bit of a humor to all of this, and then I'll come back to my story here and why I shared this with you and why it's one of the chapters in my book. Is that, okay, so there's the EMT. So obviously a certain period of time passed from when I was hit, and I'm lying on the ground looking up into this EMT's face. For a matter of fact, my bicycle already had been propped up on a local street light. She then said to me, the EMT, we're gonna have to take you to the hospital. And I said, well, I'm Rabbi Moss, and I got to get to temple. I got a bat mitzvah to get to. And she said, you're not getting to temple right now. And then the police showed up, and they all know me because I'm a chaplain to the Suffolk County Police Department. Anyway, I end up in a local hospital. For those of you who know Suffolk County, Long Island, and Bayshore. And so I'm wheeled into the emergency room, and the triage nurse comes up to me. I'm a chaplain in the hospital also. And so I said, I'm Rabbi Moss Chaplin in the hospital. I got a bat mitzvah to go to. I got to get out of here fast. She screams out, does anyone know what he's talking about? I have no idea. I need a Jewish doctor here to help me here to understand what he's talking about. My God. Anyway, another miracle. Would you believe a Dr. Matthew Schwartz shows up, no less. I mean, you can't get much more Jewish than that, right? Matthew Schwartz. Anyway, even with a head CT, he got me out in an hour, which is amazing. And my wife picked me up and drove me to the bat mitzvah. And I did that one, and actually a second one that afternoon. I was very, very fortunate. No broken bones, just simply some road rash. I was very, 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 very fortunate. But I share this story for many reasons, but the most important one in terms of what I'm trying to share with you today is, about a year or so later, I was with someone at dinner who was a retired ER nurse, but she also was a very spiritually oriented person, as I am. And it all has to be with what? Are you prepared to turn the switch on? Are you prepared to turn the faucet on? Are you prepared to say, you know something? When I reside with God, when God lives with me, and I know God lives with me, then possibilities are infinite, for God is infinite. I described the situation, my experience that day with her. And also I said one thing which I didn't share with you yet, and that is I had an out-of-body experience. Because people said to me, was I aware of being hit by the car? And the answer is no. Thank God, because then it would have been more difficult for me as soon as I healed, I got back on the bicycle. If I relived that, I'd probably have PTSD. However, I did see from outside my body, my head with my riding helmet on, hit the ground twice. I saw that happen. And I must have gone unconscious because there was that time between when I was hit and I'm looking up at the EMT. When I shared this with this retired ER nurse, who's also, again, spiritually oriented, she said to me, Steve, your neshama, your higher, by the way, for those of you, this is another class, there are 5 levels to our soul. Okay, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chai, nechida. Your higher level of your soul, your neshama, your infinite part of you left your body, and that's what saw, and if any of you have had an out-of-body experience, some people during surgery, things like this, is that that's what watched your head hitting the ground twice. God, she said to me, took your soul out of your body in order to enable you to live, because if your neshama had remained inside of you, you would have died. God saved you that day by removing the higher levels of you and then allowing it to come back when I became conscious. Now again, just like that moment when I sat with that boy, we could ask a billion questions about this. We can analyze this from day one to the end of time. But for me, when she said this to me, of course, obviously, it's the kind of thing I like to hear, all right, obviously. You kind of all get a glimpse of who I am and what kind of a person I am. But the fact is that, you know something? I say to myself, you know something? That makes sense to me because of my strong belief that God is always with us, even during moments like that. And the fact is, of course, I also have to say is that I also believe that God is with us when, guess what? When we do die, because I do believe that we have a neshama that is eternal. I also did an incredible bike ride 2 years ago, which is called the Ride for the Living, which is a 60-mile bike ride from Auschwitz to Terezin. It's a one-day 60-mile ride. There were 250 riders, and it's really a wonderful experience. It's extraordinary. I'd never been to Auschwitz, so I thought, and I love bike riding, so I thought if I put the two together, so I signed up for that ride, and as I said, it was 2 years ago. The ride is always the last week in June or the first week in July, because in Krakow, that's when they hold the largest Jewish culture fair in Eastern Europe. And over 10,000 people attend the different activities of the fair during the course of those weeks. Last week in June, first week in July. And during that week, they also now have this ride to raise monies for the JCC in Krakow, which is an incredible institution, one which we can definitely be proud of as Jews. And if you want to contribute to something important, aside from my own bike ride or Temple Bethel, is obviously to contribute to the JCC of Krakow. Anyway, since I was already going into Eastern Europe, and I went with a friend, he didn't bike ride, but he accompanied me, and we ended up doing a ride, a car ride, not a bike ride, through Eastern Europe. So we went to Krakow. We landed in Warsaw, went to Krakow, we went to Warsaw, and I was able to visit, I made sure we visited Terezin, the concentration camp, and also Treblinka, which was totally, actually out of the 3 concentration camps, Treblinka was to me the most overwhelming of all. But I want to talk about Terezin for a moment. Auschwitz, also to say that Auschwitz, I don't know, how many of you have been to Auschwitz? Anyone? No one's hands up. It's an incredible experience, but it's too clean. When you go to Terezin, the grass is mowed, the buildings are immaculately kept. Let me tell you, because I tried constantly as I was having these experiences there, I tried to put myself into what it was like for those who suffered there and died there, murdered there. It was much too clean. It's like going through a museum, okay? It is a museum, but it's a holy museum. And so I was able to experience a lot. I learned a lot, especially when we went to Birkenau too, where the crematoria are. But Terezin was a totally different experience for me. My friend, unfortunately, he has difficulty walking, and they didn't have any access for people who are disabled. He's a Vietnam vet. So anyway, I went by myself to Terezin. And as I walked through the main, I have a whole, PowerPoint on this, so I could show you the photographs. But as you walk through the main entrance of Terezin, and on top of it, over the archway, are the words Arbeit macht frei, which of course are very famous from Auschwitz. Obviously, that was one of the lovely statements that the Nazis had. The minute I walked through, I immediately felt that I was there before. Everything looked familiar. And as I walked into the various rooms, the shower rooms or the bunk rooms or the barracks rooms or whatever, everything I felt I was there before. And then I began to smell death. I began to hear crying and hear screaming. It was literally as if I was there before. And again, I do believe in reincarnation. And I do believe that I was brought there. I mean, after all, I could have just gone to Prague and gone then. I was actually looking for the grave of the last rabbi in my family, who I mentioned in the last class, my grandmother's grandfather, which I was able to find in Lithuania. I could have just gone there. What drove me to Terezin? That feeling that I was there before awakened within me, and I was overwhelmed by this in an incredible, unexplainable, but also spiritual sense. My Kabbalah teacher in Yerushalayim, Eliyahu Shir, when I later mentioned to him about this experience, and I said to him, is it possible that the soul of a person who was murdered in Terezin, because no one survived Terezin, was inside of me, and that's what I heard, what came out of me that day, and needed me to go back that day. That person needed me to go back there. I just said she. I don't know why I said she. Okay. Is that he said to me, yes, he's had a number of people who have gone to the concentration camps and told him the exact same thing. They've gone to these places. And by the way, Terezin is not like Auschwitz. We all see Auschwitz in the movies. You don't see Terezin very often. And you certainly don't see the inside of the rooms where I actually walked into. I touched the barracks with my hands. In Auschwitz, you can't. They're behind ropes. And now in Terezin, you can actually touch the barracks. And he said to me, yes. And I said to him, yeah, but only 70 years ago, don't souls have to wait a long time to be He said, no. It could literally be someone could die tomorrow, and the next day, a part of their soul could be in yours. Or you could be it, and if you were being born. And so to me, as I've experienced I've had these experiences in my life, to me, they only reaffirm the sense of God's presence always. And so the question I have to ask for all of us and to ask you is, what then does this mean? It means, number one is, if we believe that all the experiences in life are presented to us by God and not by accident, then it means that the experiences of life come to us, the good and the bad, the beautiful and, yeah, what we could call the ugly, in order to be a part of our lives in one way or another. The question is, what do we do with that information? What do we do with that experience? After all, why is it, as I mentioned at the last class, that I truly believe that God spoke to me in my parents' back, in my home's, in my family's backyard, telling me to become a rabbi? I could simply ignore it, or I could say, you know something, maybe this is something important for me to do. The same way is my grandmother's grandfather, who looks exactly like me. Does he speak through me? And if he does he speak to me? And thereby, is that a part of the story of my life that God is writing for me? And the question is, when I understand that and feel that, what then does that mean? I was also a chaplain at New York Hospital Cornell. I was in the elevator, and there was a man who was wheeled into the elevator on a stretcher, and he was in a lot of pain. Obviously, you could see that, you could feel it. Everyone in the elevator looked everywhere else but him. I looked at him and I said, I'm sorry to see the pain that you are in. And I introduced myself to him. And I said to him, would you like me to hold your hand and help you? And he was, obviously there was an escort with him in the elevator there, and go with you to your room. And so we did. And it turned out to be that from that moment until a few weeks later when he died, we became very close to each other. I could have looked the other way. We could look the other way in all the experiences of our lives, but when we say, you know something, maybe there's a reason for this. Maybe for this moment in time, there is a greater purpose that's going on, because I need to live in the infinite and realize that, and then realms, worlds open up. I also walked into this man's room. His name was Charlie. Charlie was a lawyer in Kentucky, and he was sitting on the edge of his bed, hysterically crying. And when I tell these stories, obviously these are the more dramatic ones in my experiences of 30 years, actually 50 years as a chaplain in various hospitals and 30 years at Sloan Kettering. These are the more dramatic stories. But I share them with you because it is from the dramatic that we learn about the undramatic, because everything is a part of it all, just different intensities of it. It's like, for instance, if someone says, you know something, I'm only going to believe in God if God splits the Red Sea for me and does incredible, miraculous things. I actually hear a voice. Well, guess what? We hear God's voice always. God's voice is always here. God's presence is always here. The question is, are you ready to flick the switch or turn the faucet on? So I walked into Charlie's room. I sat down in his bed. He was hysterically crying. He was about 48 years old or so. I put my arm around his shoulder, and I introduced myself, obviously, before doing that. And I said, what's going on? He said to me, well, the surgeon just ran into the room and said to him he's going to give him 3 weeks to go home to Kentucky to make a decision. The surgeon wants to do an operation, but it would be a very drastic operation. He had cancer throughout his abdomen, his bladder, his abdomen. He would basically need a colostomy and an ileostomy, both in the operation. In other words, he'd never be able to go to the bathroom in a normal fashion for the rest of his life. And Charlie, as I mentioned, was a lawyer. So before he could ask this doctor a question, because lawyers are trained to ask questions, right? Is that the doctor flew out of the room. And Charlie was crying because he said, what am I going to do? How am I going to make a decision? I need to speak to a person who knows to get some answers here. He just said, I should decide. I should make up my mind. And all of a sudden, the doctor came flying back into the room and said, oh, I forgot to tell you, Charlie, that if you have the surgery, you'll be free of cancer. And And then he left. Charlie looked at me and said, "What did he say?" I told him what he said. Anyway, Charlie did have the surgery, as drastic as it was. He did have the surgery. For the next 3 years, every single time Charlie came to Sloan Kettering from Kentucky to meet with the doctor and was going to meet with the doctor, he made sure in those early years, I was there almost full time, that I was there because he realized that he needed someone who could be an objective listener to confirm or affirm what was being told to him, what would be done to him, etc., etc. Charlie was Jewish. He had a Jewish wife. He had kids raised as Jews, but he did not belong to a temple. And as he said to me over and over and over again, he never, ever would have called upon a rabbi his entire life, because he had this vision of rabbis just mumbling some kind of prayers or whatever it is, or talking about whatever it is. He never would have called upon a rabbi ever, but he learned what a rabbi can do. To be what? To be with someone. To just be there, and that's it, and to care. I became so close to Charlie, I'll never forget the last time I saw him. He was, unfortunately, things did not go well after 3 years. He was dying. And I'll never forget the last day I saw him, because I was going to come back, then obviously visiting every week, every day, or a couple of days at that time. We hugged each other, and we actually told each other how much we loved each other and cared about each other. And I told him how much an effect he had upon my life, and he thanked me also. And the next day, I got a call from his family that he had died, and they actually flew me to Kentucky to officiate at his funeral. Now, we can say, well, all of this is wonderful. Obviously, you helped this man, etc. But I will say this to you. When we believe that things happen to us for a reason, for a purpose, because God is giving us these opportunities to do something special, each, not just me, all of you, every one of us, from the moment we're born to the moment we die and beyond, then guess what? I can also say the following. If there's any reason why, when the New York Board of Rabbis called me up when I was 21 years old and said to me, and I was doing some visitations at a nursing home in Manhattan, do I have time to go over to Sloan Kettering, because there's a woman there who's I was told by her, she's 45 years old, and told by a physician she has 2 days to live, and is hysterical, but there's no chaplain available at the hospital. I was a rabbinical student then. Could you go and be with her? And if I could say to myself, if every moment is infinite and every moment is holy, then guess what? If there's any reason why at whatever this was, 5 years before, 10 years before, I said yes to that call from the New York Board of Rabbis, which I did, that led to all of these other things happening to me, and ultimately becoming the first student rabbi ever to be considered a chaplain by the New York Board of Rabbis when I was 23 years old, and ultimately to be with Charlie on that day, I could say yes. If for no other reason, to use that word that we had at Passover, I could say Dayenu. If there was no other reason for me to ever say yes originally, then it would be enough if I simply only had that one experience with Charlie, no less all the thousands of others that I had during all these years. When we are there in the infinite, then we enter into that realm of holiness and realize, as Jacob said, is that this place is none other than what? Shar HaShemayim, the gate of heaven. Because guess what? Where you're sitting in your room, where I'm in my room, wherever we are is the gate of heaven. Once we do what? Just like Jacob did that day. Remember the whole thing with his ladder and all that stuff, and sleeping on those rocks and whatever. Once we say that, it becomes. So kind of moving toward putting all of this together as best as I can, so that maybe you'll hopefully be able to walk away with something from today, in addition to paying, buy my book. Okay. Is what? Is first of all, to allow life to be a wow experience for you. To be able to, and I know that the rabbis on the pulpit there at Temple Bethel speak about this all the time, is to be able to say, wow, this is special. Wow, this is a holy moment. And even, like I described to you, even with baby Paul, the moments of great tragedy are holy moments. Because when we recognize they're holy, we're able to get into them, be there for ourselves or our loved ones who need us, and then also to be able to what? Be able to move beyond them eventually. As I mentioned, I was on the head and neck surgery that I visited. And I walked into this man's room. Keep in mind, I was probably like 21 years old or something. Fortunately, in my life, I had very little experience. I had no experience with anyone in my family with cancer at that time in 1970s. In quotes, I guess I'd say my life was beautiful. My family was beautiful. My parents were beautiful and handsome. Just really good stuff. I walked into this patient's room, and he had a melanoma, which is a very, as many of you probably know, a form of skin cancer, but it actually covered half his face. Half his face was a melanoma. I never, by the way, I couldn't even watch medical shows on TV. I would put a medical show, and immediately something got gory, bloody, or whatever. I ran out. Okay, well, I learned differently since then. But anyway, I walked into this man's room. I saw that he was sleeping, thankfully. I saw this thing on his face, and I almost threw up. I ran out of the room. I stood in the hallway. My heart is palpitating. I thought it was going to jump out of my chest. I was just so revolted by what I saw. But I stood there in that hallway. And again, this to me is a moment in the infinite, because when we immediately have this self-reflection, it's God who gives us the ability to reflect back upon our lives, our feelings, our emotions, what we're going through, is that I said to myself, I got to get myself together here, take a deep breath, and I got to go back into that room, even though I did not want to, believe you me. And I need to go back into that room and be with him. Because I said to myself, you know something, as ugly as he looks, guess what? To me, imagine what he looks like to himself. And yet I got to find the neshama, the soul, the person within that face. And that's what I have to relate to. So I walked into that room. He had awakened. I sat down by his bed. And again, I took his hand and we talked. And actually, every day during the next couple of weeks while he was there at the hospital, I made sure that I visited with him and just listened to him and dealt with all the stuff that he was obviously going through, and certainly to have before the very drastic surgery that he went through. So the thing is to say wow to all of the moments in life because they're wholly given to us by God. To say wow to the great, amazing things in life, as well as the smallest, as I quoted last week from Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. If it can be, as Walt Whitman taught us, a leaf of grass is no less than the journey work of the stars. If a little teeny leaf of grass is a speck within the infinite, then guess what? So are the great things, including, as I shared last time, great sunsets, or for those of you in privileged to be in Maui, as Judy, my wife, and I were, to be at the top of Haleakala, an extant volcano, 11,000 feet up, and watch sunrise and see that day created for you, for me, for the people up there. Interestingly enough, as the sun started to come up and little rays started to come up and all, is that there were people applauding. Okay, wow, okay, great, God, good. Okay, I said a bracha, because that's what it's really all about, the bracha. That's the purpose of blessings. And then the final thing, of course, is what? Therefore, bracha is to live a life of gratitude. That's the key, okay? In our tradition, we're taught in the Talmud that we should say a minimum of 100 brachot, a minimum of 100 blessings a day. Interestingly enough, when I told my members of my congregation up north about this, she actually got a hand counter, those things that they have, people coming into different locations. And she actually started counting every time she said, thank you, God, bracha, brachata, thank you. Okay, you don't have to go to that extreme. It doesn't have to be exactly 100, okay? She was a little OCD, I think. But anyway, is that every moment in truth is a moment to give bracha, right? To give blessing. But the minute we say that, thank you, God, is that it opens up infinite possibilities of experience and the appreciation of all that God has given to us. When we say, from the moment we wake up in the morning, Modeh Ani, I give you thanks, God, for returning my soul. The same thing at night, when we say we're giving our soul back. And the same thing, as you all know, is true as well, that the last words that we should say before we die, and that is we're giving back our soul to God to continue on its very beautiful journey, for which I've been privileged to become aware of. And I pray and I hope that by what I've shared with you today and last time, you may be been able to be able to find the same yourselves. Thank you.
Rabbi Moss, thank you so much. I'm going to open it up if anyone has any questions or comments, and I'll just say, I put the book in the chat. If you're able to get it. I think what's so beautiful about hearing you speak is at the same time, which I think is what we experience, you express like how close God is and yet how far away God feels, like that, we don't know to turn on the faucet or the light switch. And I'm teaching a prayer class at night. And one of the things we do at the beginning is say, what did you pray for this week? Because I think we sometimes feel like, oh, we have to do this or we can't do that, or, we're not allowed to say this. And like, just understanding that like it's our hand or our heart that turns on the spigot or turns on the light switch is really powerful and eloquent. And it's just very like you bring God close. And with these beautiful reflections of yours, I want to open up. Does anyone have any comments or questions they want to put in the chat or unmute? You have the ability to unmute and ask out loud. Just looking. I mean, we talked a lot about loss. Hi, Dory. Did you want to say something, or I saw you on? You're muted. You got to unmute. I think here. I think you were unmuted and then muted again.
Thank
Go ahead.
you. Yeah, I clicked it off by accident. I've often had the feeling that I was in Auschwitz, like I've stayed away from all those experiences, and it might have been a different concentration camp, but I always find that when someone mentions a Holocaust, I tear up. And I don't think it's just normal. Like, I don't think it's a normal thing to just tear up all the time when someone mentions the Holocaust. And yet when the rabbi, I just tuned in halfway through his lecture and didn't hear him for the other 4 visits. I have had that experience as well. And I always felt so weird, like maybe no one else has had it. But when he verbalized it, I said, yeah, I've had that my whole life.
Mm.
It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
It's so much,
Oh, yes.
so much.
Well, as I've been learning, as I've been doing studying now reincarnation Judaism, it might very well be that the soul, the neshama of a Holocaust person is inside of you and is enabling your life to be able to have the sensitivity to all of that affecting who you are, obviously. And we're able to have numerous souls as a part of our soul. It's not just one per one. And that might be that person is crying within inside of you because of what she or he went through. And that's enabling you then to be the very sensitive and beautiful person that obviously you are.
It's so funny because you don't know her son, Houston, who's the most happy person. Like, it's like amazing that you carry that, because then your son, like Houston, is just this like ball of light and love. Like, I think even like my ex-husband and daughter were visiting UF, and I think Houston found them. Like he's just like a love ball. So like it's almost like you took that pain on Dory, and then like Houston was free to just be joyous and he's very responsible too and a leader, but he's all love and light. Judy, were you going to say something too?
Yes,
I was going to say that I also had that energy when I was younger too. So
Yeah.
it wasn't always a serious person as a
Yeah.
mom.
Yeah. Judy, go ahead.
We visited Stutthof in Gdańsk, Poland, and you put the words correctly. It was a museum. It didn't feel, we saw the pile of shoes, but what felt real was going to that crematorium.
Oh, yeah.
They had just a one-person thing there. My husband and I stood there and said, Kaddish. But the place itself was a museum. It wasn't what I think it was truly.
Yeah. Although when you walk, for certain things speak to you. When in Auschwitz, they have different barracks and they have things on display. And for apparently none of you have been there. If you get a chance to, it's overwhelming. There's one barracks that there's a huge whole room filled with human hair.
Yeah.
And when you see that, it's just overwhelming because it's obviously so personal. Just a collection of the human hair. It's just unbelievable. But Treblinka was the most powerful of it all. There's an amazing monument to Dr. Janek, who actually was the physician in an orphanage in Warsaw.
Right, Janusz.
He decided when the Nazis gave him a choice of staying back or going, accompanying the children under his care to Treblinka to die. He decided to go with them. And so there's a magnificent memorial with hundreds of stones just in a huge concentric circle, hundreds of them of all different sizes. And it looks like human beings. It's just it's one of the most overwhelming memorials I've ever seen in my life. Almost as powerful as some of the ones you see now down in 9/11.
Natalie, last comment, and then we have to end. If you can unmute.
Natalie, unmute.
Do that. There we go.
Yeah.
So I was in Auschwitz in 1973. And I think it was a very different experience then. We were part of the first Jewish group to ever visit Auschwitz. When we got there, all the signs were in all the languages of the world, but Hebrew and Yiddish. So none of that was there. The Jewish Pavilion was locked. There was something called the Jewish Pavilion, and it was locked. And it took them maybe 25 minutes to find a key, since those of us who were there had no intention of leaving until we had visited there. On the other hand, some of what you saw as prettying things up read to us, because there was the hair and the shoes, but it read to us how normalized this was for the people who were doing it. They were, our stereotype of Germans is that they wanted to be neat and clean and orderly. And so this was just a very routine procedure. They had a gift shop. I don't know if they still do, where you can buy pencils that say Auschwitz on them. It was sort of a bizarre experience, to tell you the truth.
Well, the thing that really turned me off was that there was actually a Frankfurter truck in the parking lot. Really, that's, yeah.
On the other hand,
And
even then it was full of school children, and people with German children were there with their teachers who were explaining what had happened and how it was important that they learn about it. And so there's a place for that too. I wouldn't write it off.
but the
No,
focus of the book
understand
is many areas. It's not just.
Oh yeah, no,
that
the book is
visit.
right. Exactly.
That's it. So the link to the book is in the chat. Rabbi Moss, thank you so much for
Very
these
welcome, Rabbi.
sessions. It was wonderful, and have a wonderful. As I said, next month for May, we start with Rachel Korazim. Some of you, I saw Jack on earlier. He might be gone. Have been blessed. Stephen Sue been blessed to study there since the beginning of the pandemic. She is the best teacher of Israeli poetry you will ever find, and we're focusing on something that I think is really interesting. A poet, Natan Alterman, who was both a journalist and a poet, and really spoke spoke to the events of the time and place. Some you'll know, some you won't. So hopefully you'll join us. And everyone have a wonderful
Thank you,
afternoon, and
everyone.
thank you
Thanks for
so
listening.
much.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Make sure to buy the book. Be well. Bye-bye.